Hi everyone, happy Monday. You're joined with me, Sarah Dallal. I don't know if anyone's feeling this at the moment, but my hay fever is kicking my bum. Like it's really, really brutal at the moment. So if anyone is a hay fever girly or guy like me, then do let me know. We also saw all of your comments about BST, Banseka Standard Time, and Sarah Delay and Curtis Late Daily. You had
I
us
will
crazy before we came in, but I'm joined by Banseka, by the way. So, Banseka, how are you?
I will have you know, guys, I was here on time. I got in the studio and no one else was here. So I
I
was
was
here
here, but I
on
was no camera.
time.
I was trying to do my bun and my edges. I had my head wrap on so the edges would be
Oh,
laid.
stress. Yeah, I laid my hair down really quickly before this as well because it was a mess under a headband.
It looks really cute though, so at least we got
Thank
good. We
you.
got we got sick hair today, guys. So we're not talking about our hair though. We're going to talk about the things that are happening in the news. Firstly, it's so great to have everyone. But coming up on tonight's show, we've got is Burnham under threat, and Reform's Makerfield candidate is pretty much a pig. GB News reporter Ben Leo interrogated outside of ICE facility, and that was a very, very intense interaction that we'll look into in a second. And finally, Hasan, Piker, and Cenk Uygur banned from the UK. But as ever, you can help us grow with visiting turnleftmedia.co.uk/support to help fund our work, or by becoming a YouTube member for just 99p. But onto our first story. Let's take ourselves to Makerfield and let's get a load of this guy. This guy is Reform Councillor Rob Kenyon, and he says that the media attacks are coming in thick and fast, but that won't stop us. I was born here, schooled here, and live here. Makerfield deserves to finally have a local MP. Okay, so I'll be so honest with you. I didn't know who this guy was, and I had to do a little digging into who he is. And I found this cute little article. Not so cute, but Carol Vorderman demands an apology from Reform candidate over quote unquote disgusting comments. Broadcaster describes Robert Kenyon, who is standing in Makerfield by election, as a misogynist and a cowardly man. Cara Vorderman has demanded an apology from the Reform UK candidate in the upcoming Makeable by-election for discussing comments he made about her on social media in the past. The broadcast and former Countdown Numbers expert described Robert Kenyon, whom Reform has backed to face Andy Burnham in next month's vote, as a cowardly man for a series of offensive posts made by the Wigan councillor that have since been deleted along with his account. Vorderman, who last week posted a video in which she described Kenyon as a misogynist who made disgusting comments, told the Daily Mirror on Tuesday that she wanted an apology from Rob Kenyon to me and to all the other people he's abused online. In 2021, Kenyon responded to a social media post about Vorderman in which another user wrote, "My God, I'd love to smell and lick your asshole," by saying he's only saying what we're all thinking. Danny Kruger, who joined Reform last September, defended Kenyon's comments, telling BBC Radio 4 on Monday that while they were inappropriate, they were not viewed as serious enough within the party for Kenyon to be pulled as their by-election candidate. Kruger said he was not going to judge people for what are essentially regarded at the time and intended as private conversations. Kruger conceded that it was clearly wrong for politicians to talk in that way, but added he was not a politician at the time. He was an ordinary man from an ordinary place, and what he's done now is a step forward, outraged at the state of our country and the state of his community. Oh, ordinary man. Ordinary men don't say horrid comments like that. Ordinary men should not treat women like that, whether they're in or out of politics. I don't know what feeble, rubbish excuse that was. Well, he wasn't in politics, so it doesn't really matter. Anyway, then I see this on his Twitter, which I had a little gander at. Andy Burnham failed grooming gang survivors across this area. These are not the actions of a leader. He'll say anything to get elected, then abandon Wiganers the first chance he gets, just as he has as mayor. Reform UK has a plan to finally deliver justice for our girls. Our girls, our girls, our girls. They always talk about girls, 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 possess them in the way that they do, don't actually mean it, do they? But it kind of stinks of irony. Justice for girls, but getting onto Carol Vorderman and talking about smelling and licking her asshole, make it make sense. Normalising that sort of behaviour was okay once upon a time, was it? Very weird. But the conversation I want to open up is this guy actually a threat to Andy? Currently, as it stands, Andy Burnham is on 43%, and we've got Robert Kenyon slightly behind on 40%. We also had Farage publicly backing Kenyan, by the way, obviously. But the way he went about it is a little bloody insane. Let's have a look. He says Andy Burnham is not for them. Sorry, let me start again. Andy Burnham is for them, not for you. Vote reform in Makerfield. Is that an AI generated image, Nige? You know, AI slot being used to assert that Burnham is for small boat migrants and not for the people of Britain. If Labour struggles in one of its traditional heartlands, despite fielding one of its most popular and recognisable politicians, I think it will raise some pretty big questions about the party's ability to maintain support amongst their voter base. It will raise questions about whether the government is delivering change at a pace that voters can actually feel, and also questions around Labour's whole political strategy and whether it's capable of addressing this growing sense of alienation that exists across many communities. But more broadly, I think it highlights the challenge facing the entire left. And I know that arguably now at the moment we're looking at the Labour Party and saying they don't represent the left at all, particularly how far the Overton window has shifted. But there are lots of questions around where Labour could possibly stand if Burnham actually gets this. But all of this economic frustration that people are feeling is not channeled into the discussions that it needs to be. They're not talking about wages, not talking about housing or public ownership, inequality and workers' rights. So I do wonder if Burnham is going to take a stand, if this progressive politics is actually going to have any sort of impact. But I could talk about this. You can listen to my voice, but I'd rather hear from Banseka. Banseka, what do you think? Is this guy actually a threat to Burnham in the upcoming by-election?
Yeah, he's a strange candidate, really. I'm not really sure why, when it comes to by-elections, Reform's track record seems to be choosing people who just seem thoroughly unsuitable as candidates. Matt Goodwin, I said from the beginning, I thought he was pretty unsuitable for some different reasons to this particular case. He wasn't local. He didn't have a lot of charisma, let's face it. And also there was some aspects of the sort of policy positions where he seemed to be unable to answer any questions around cost of living, and everything was too much about migration. Gorton and Denton, a bit more of a mixed election territory, right, compared to Makerfield, in terms of that, it's a bit more cosmopolitan. There are sections of Gorton and Denton where you can't just go in and start complaining about migrants and expect that to be good enough. Initially on paper, when I saw this candidate, I was like, oh, okay, I see what they've done here. They've chosen a plumber, someone with the cultural hallmarks of being working class. I don't personally think he is working class, by the way, because he's a self-employed plumber, I think. So he's probably not, on the more precarious end of work, but, a working person, nevertheless. There's been a barrage of stuff, and Reform's strategy in terms of dealing with it initially was to just ignore it completely, not say anything. Then it was to just sort of brush it off or deny it as a bit of a psyop, an establishment hack. Then they moved to claiming, well, it was actually just a really long time ago. And now that the line seems to be, well, it's a private conversation and that doesn't reflect who they are in public now. So they've gone through several different iterations in 2 weeks of excuses. I suppose the question is, do I think that will really work? I think my gut feeling at the moment is that some of this will harm his chances. We haven't had much polling yet, but I think there was a poll done maybe last week from Sebation. It's just one poll, but it shows Andy Burnham eking ahead by a few points already. There's a suggestion, obviously, that Restore may split the vote anyway, may split the vote on the right. That's worrying, because the idea that, Restore might be taking away votes from Reform means that Reform may actually see that as grounds to become even more right wing, and to eke into that territory more and more as well, in a way to not be outflanked on the right. It's quite clear that Reform have abandoned really any pretenses that they might outflank Labour on the left. There was a period of time in the sort of early days in 2024, beginning of 2025, when they were sort of doing it. They talked a little bit about the idea of water nationalisation, very left-coded thing. Richard Tice was spotted at like a trade union meeting. That dimension is now gone. really, and that there isn't really any left wing or left wing coded agenda that people can kind of latch on to. I think part of that is due to the presence of the Green Party. Actually, they're not going to out left the Green Party, so maybe to an extent they've just given up on that. And Bandy Burnham, to his credit, I'll get on to complaining about him in a minute as well, because there's lots to talk about that I think leaves much to be desired. But I think Burnham will be a tricky candidate for reform to beat. He's not your kind of regular Labour candidate who, has just done like back to back bits of their career in like, water lobbying or, God knows what else, like some of these newer candidates have been in. He's far and away the most popular senior figure in the party. YouGov polling had him on something like plus 4%, compared to a variety of other senior politicians. He's more popular, according to that poll at the moment, than Zach Belansky. But then there's also a question of the fact that Zach Belansky obviously faces a lot more heat as someone with a more national position as leader of a party, compared to Andy Burnham, who's much more regional. So Burnham, I think, will be a tricky candidate for reform here. They're going to continue to throw everything at it because it's in their interests for Andy Burnham to not win that seat. They want Keir Starmer to stay there as long as possible, because as long as Keir is there, that provides fertile ground for them to continue taking votes. So, yeah, I think that this candidate, as the election goes on, is looking weaker and weaker. I saw a couple of interviews, I have to say, of him as well, just some clips where he was really weak on questioning. And these were softball interviews and softball questions. He was weak. He didn't really seem to have a lot of strength to him. He didn't really seem to have much materially to say. So he strikes me as quite a talentless politician, actually. And as much as we'll talk about the flaws of Andy Burnham, I do think he looks like a weak candidate, frankly.
Yeah, he does. And I think you're absolutely right. Like, if you're not answering questions properly, then people aren't going to take you seriously. I think he thinks that he might just be able to skirt his way through, despite being quite regular schmegular. Yeah, like, I actually completely agree with you. I think because he knows Starmer's so increasingly unpopular, that might work in his favour. But it kind of leads me quite nicely into the second question, because Burnham's candidacy also creates that unavoidable question, like, is Makerfield being treated as a constituency in need of representation, or just as a stepping stone in his wider political career?
Oh, sorry.
I was like, shit.
Spacing out there.
I'm
I'm still here.
actually thought that it dropped, and I was like, fuck.
No, I was thinking ahead and then lost my train of thought. Yeah, so that's a really good question to ask, right? And that's been a reform attack line, which I think is a good attack line from their perspective, right? It's quite a funny attack line, because obviously Nigel Farage, like, he's running 7 seats across the country,
Yeah.
before becoming finally the MP for Clacton. So it's very funny to see them rolling with that attack line, but it's a somewhat convincing one. I think there is some cut through to that argument for local people living in Makerfield. Perhaps not enough to derail his chances of winning, but he does have a reputation amongst some, including people on the left, by the way, who view with suspicion his kind of political chameleon-like qualities. He's worn a number of different political hats across his time as being a politician. He's been in politics since the early 2000s, pretty much straight out of uni, I believe. So that opportunistic line probably has some resonance, because there may be some truth to that. There was a really interesting article, actually, I don't know if anybody read it, in a local paper called the Manchester Mill, that was exploring Andy Burnham. It was a bit of a long read, but it was really, really interesting. And it was good to read something, frankly, from someone who's actually local to Manchester, as opposed to, all the SW1 journalists who, in many respects, myself included, we don't know loads in detail about what's been going on in Manchester over the last several years. And the argument of this article, which I think is really compelling, is really that this idea of like Manchesterism, which is kind of how Andy Burnham has described himself. So not Burnerism, maybe, because that doesn't sound very good either. Doesn't really roll off the tongue, but he describes his politics as a Manchesterism, a kind of regional form of politics. And the article really suggests that he's a leader who captures a certain mood and sentiment. And I think Andy Burnham has a talent for that. He's clearly one of those people in the Labour Party who has been around since the Blairite years, but has clearly recognised that some things aren't working, and he's managed to adapt that a little bit. He's not like Tony Blair, who's just saying the same things, if not worse, than what he was saying in 2000. Tony Blair is highly ideological, and I don't think Andy Burnham is. However, the flip side of that is that Andy Burnham Also, he doesn't necessarily have a detailed program that has an ideology. You know, Manchesterism, like it's not actually really clear what that is. You know, if we look at, for example, the B network, which I think is what brought Manchester buses under this new kind of franchising model, it's not really nationalisation. It's publicly controlled private services, I believe. So that's not really municipal socialism. He's not going to do that. But my question is then, what is he going to do? What does he want to do? Because he's also rejecting this Blairite thing of, you know, in private companies encroaching more on public services, saying, no, that's not quite right. But then you're not really doing socialism either. You know, he's not really advancing to me a kind of clear ideological project. And I'm not against pragmatism. Yeah, I think pragmatism should work, should happen in politics. But I think what needs to underpin your pragmatism, if it's not going to be weak, is to have a really clear foundational layer of who you are and who your principles are. Having a really clear set of values as your starting point is key, and those things will keep you anchored and give you an overall direction, whilst you have some flexibility about perhaps how you bring about that end goal, how you bring about that vision to make people's lives better. You know, Margaret Thatcher, highly ideological. She had some pragmatism and flexibility at times in how she chose to deliver what she delivered, but she always came back to those founding principles. You could say the same thing about Clement Attlee as well, someone who showed some flexibility, but he came back to his founding principles, sort of anchored around, say, social democracy or elements of socialism, right? You know, someone like Tony Blair was obviously railing, as I said last week, about Labour for all the wrong reasons. He managed to make a list of complaints about the Labour Party that none of which were true. You could say someone like Tony Blair, frankly, governed a bit on easy mode in some respects. We were in a financial boom. We had access to cheap debt, cheap credit. And, you know, there was less urgency about recreating a new model for our economy. Burnham seems to recognise rightly that we do need to change things, but I'm not really sure that he's demonstrated the level of big, deep thought that, you know, really translates into being prime minister. Maybe he can get away with that as a metro mayor, just being, generally speaking, someone who can capture the mood, capture people's feelings, make a few pragmatic-ish changes that improve people's lives a bit. But to become the prime minister, especially at an existentially difficult time where we actually need to have a really big think and we need some really big answers to some really big questions, he's coming to that with almost no real ideology into a party that, frankly, internally will eat you alive. You know, there are people in that party who are really going to be gunning for him. And if you've got no strength of principle, if you are not really, really sure about who you are, you've already failed before you've even started, frankly.
General election. Oh, sorry, was I on mute? Sorry. Did he say that he would call for a snap general election? I think I don't know if I read that.
Yeah, I had that as well.
And then, but we've seen that before. Didn't that happen with Theresa May that called for a snap general election? I don't remember. I think it all just blends into one, but I just don't think that it's going to work in his favour. And it's quite sad because we're living in a time now where people do view Burnham as just a bit more left than what Labour is currently. And I don't actually think Burnham he's not as left as I would go. But I guess tomato, potato. But I don't know what's going to happen with Burnham. We'll see. What I don't want, and I know this is maybe a bit controversial, I don't want to see what's his name, Robert Kenyon. I don't want to see him win. I don't want to see Reform, you know, get another seat. I think that would stress me out highly. But then I think this isn't me advocating for Burnham, but I would want to see just Burnham maybe take that, to be honest, and then who knows what happens going forward. But yeah. Anyways, I'll go into the second story. Thanks so much, Banseka. So second story, we are looking at GB News. GB News reporter Ben Leo. Anyone come across him before? Had the displeasure of coming across Ben Leo. He found himself outside Delaney Hall, a New Jersey ICE detention centre, where detainees started a hunger and work strike around the 22nd of May over poor conditions and medical care. Shall we have a look at this interaction?
Or what?
20 times more likely to commit offences than
the Brits?
Yeah, native Brits.
The Brits that colonized the whole world, you mean? That raped and pillaged the whole world to get the power that they have?
The Brits, yeah.
Yeah, the Brits that did that.
Yeah.
And you guys have the audacity to say that the Afghans and Somalis did what?
It's not audacity. It's just a fact. It's
So is it not a
government
fact?
data.
Is it not a fact that y'all colonized the world through rape, murder, and pillaging? Right or wrong?
That was true. Yeah.
All right then. So what are you talking
the
about?
British Empire.
So what are you talking about then?
Hey,
How dare you? How dare you?
Why are you shouting?
What are you? Because you're. That's why. How dare you? You're talking facts. Talk facts.
Spitting in my
Let's
face.
talk. So do something about it.
I'm not.
Do something
I'm
about
a
it,
journalist,
Brit.
my friend. I'm here.
Do
to,
something about it, Brit.
I'm here to ask questions.
How'd you get into this country?
What are you talking about?
I'm here.
How dare you?
Why are you getting so angry?
really
Because you're a
interesting.
piece of you're a liar.
You know you're
a liar.
You're not.
You're a liar.
Would you like me to show you the
You're a
government
liar.
data?
Bro, I just
Am I
asked
shaking?
you.
I'm not shaking.
I just asked you what did the Brits do to have the power they have? Answer that question.
You got your elbow on me. That's
Answer
sorry, man.
that
Yeah,
question.
okay.
Answer that question. How did the
What-
Brits
what
get
was
their
the question?
power?
Can you stop spitting in my face? What was the question?
He's speaking.
Why
to you.
are you
He's asking
shaking? Why are you getting so angry?
Because drone is going, I'm holding everything back not to break your jaw.
Well, you can do it. You would get arrested.
I don't give a bro.
You get arrested.
I don't give a
This doesn't make
No,
your
it's all right.
I
argument
came
look.
out here for
This doesn't make your
I
argument
came
look
out
very
here
good.
for
Came out
I
here
didn't come out here to talk.
for violence.
Yes.
Well, there you
Yes.
go. That's the left. That is the
Who
degenerate,
started it?
violent
Who
left.
started it?
You give facts.
Who
You
started it?
came all the way over.
Who
here just to
started it?
start shit, didn't you?
Who started
You
it?
give facts. You give
Who
data,
started it?
and they get violent.
Hey,
This is
why
what
don't
you
you
see
finish
on the
it?
streets of Newark last
Why
night.
don't
Started,
you go
I'ma
back to
finish
your
it.
country?
Started, I'm gonna finish it.
Yeah, I wish you well, my friend.
Started, I'm gonna finish it.
You're
Hey, why don't you go back to your country?
no, I live here at the moment.
Oh, you live here.
I do, yeah,
How'd
I've
you
got
get
a-
over here? What you do?
Aeroplane.
Oh, cool.
It's that guy at the end that goes, oh, cool. But that whole interaction was so heated. Obviously, as we know, the figures that Leo is using are absolute horseshit. They're bogus. He and GB News often cite the Centre for Migration Control, which obviously, as we know very, very well, is a fake think tank ran by this individual, Robert Bates, who probably is in his basement just like typing away. And he's a senior reformer member. They push this narrative that migrants, specifically Afghans, commit more crime in Britain. And if you want to find out more about it, follow our very own Lewis Aaron on TikTok at Lewis B. Aaron. He goes into a lot more detail about this. Ben Leo is problematic, okay? The things that he's saying are problematic, and the things that he's saying are things that people commonly do say in the online sphere and do say on the right quite often. Let's look at Ben Leo's tweets afterwards, just reacting to it. So he puts the screenshot or the video there, and he says, me, certain nationalities in the UK are more likely to commit sexual offences than Brits. And then he puts, leftist nutcase, I'm going to break your fucking jaw. ICE detention facility in New Jersey. I'm not surprised Charlie Kirk was murdered. These people are lunatics. These men love pretending that they care about women and girls. They love pretending that women and girls are all part of their agenda, like that they care. They don't care. What's happening here is a literal, oh my God, my focus is so bad. Why is it doing this? Wild. Is it going to focus? There we go. Yeah. Oh, why is it doing that? Right, let's start again. What's happening here is a textbook example of how misinformation and emotional escalation get bundled together to justify sweeping and dangerous generalizations. Fuck me, this is actually not working. First, the claim that certain nationalities in the UK are more likely to commit sexual offences than Brits is not something you can responsibly throw out as a standalone justification for political rhetoric. Crime stats are complex. They're shaped by loads of things: age, that someone is, their socioeconomic background, the deprivation, policing practices in the area, and reporting rates. So when you strip all that context away to imply innate or collective criminality, it's fucking lazy. You're trying to distort the reality of harm against women and girls to suit your narrative against migration. Secondly, being in or outside a US ICE detention facility does not somehow validate this ridiculous sweeping claim about British society or migrants in the UK. We are looking at very, very separate systems here, but look at him trying to validate the things that he's saying by standing outside one of the most egregious places that exists in the US, where they are literally harming the people and taking kids off the streets to reprimand them for being in the country. So it was just that confrontation, and I think Ben Leo was the most confrontational because he was the one that was asking that man questions. He was the one that was trying to distort reality. But also, thirdly, the idea that disagreement or confrontation with a quote unquote leftist, what do you call it, leftist maniac, somehow explains or anticipates like political violence or is evidence that these people are lunatics, is a really, really serious and extreme leap. It's insane. Disagreeing on something, especially when it's not factual, is very, very normal, Ben. So literally buck up. But Banseka, what are your thoughts on all of this? What are your reactions to that?
Yeah, that's a really frustrating watch, I have to say. I mean, a part of me, obviously, I don't condone violence, by the way. So I'm not saying I was cheering on any violence happening, but a part of me was somewhat happy to at least see some robustness in terms of that GB News presenter, reporter, and the sort of hate and the misinformation that he was spouting at least be kind of taken seriously and robustly. I mean, his attempt to push out false inflammatory information, use that to kind of wind people up. They then react and have quite an explosive reaction, and then just sort of point at and be like, "Aha, that's the left. It's always very violent," as though as though the right does not have an agenda that includes a huge level of violence. When we think about the violence that's been wreaked across the world through capitalism, through colonial exploitation, as the gentleman pointed out, we think about the rights agenda in Palestine alone and the devastation and destruction of that cause. That's not violence. That's just, that's just politics and that's just war. But, the left is really, really violent. And that's a kind of, to be honest with you, it's quite a far right tactic, I'd say, actually, like trying to instill this belief that there's an inherent violence to leftists that must be snuffed out, kind of reminiscent of, not to take any extremes here, but that kind of tactic is quite reminiscent of fear mongering that Nazi Germany used to do, for example, and other states as well, to snuff out essentially your political opposition. So this is the left, they're just inherently violent. And of course, once you start claiming that people are inherently violent or inherently problematic, that then lays down the groundwork, for much more extreme measures against people, right? Typical kind of empire-like tactic, to be quite honest with you. That kind of weaponization of the data, so-called data, that the JB News reporter was spouting was absolutely deliberate, right? It creates an environment, of course, that raises people's fears, it raises people's worries, it raises people's concerns about safety, and it concerns people's rightful questions and worries that they have about safety with a kind of eugenic perspective or a eugenic racist lens, where we start to view sexual crimes and perhaps other forms of criminality as well. Terrorism, I suppose, is another one, where we start to view that predominantly through the lens of race, and we start to see that as a race or kind of so-called cultural problem, right? And once the media has done that, it then starts to manufacture consent for more harsher immigration policies, for higher levels of surveillance, particularly against certain groups, but it starts to pull out more and more to other people, a kind of exclusionary nationalism and erosion of civil liberties. We'll talk about that in a moment, with obviously people like Hasan and Cenk Uygur being banned from coming here. So the raison d'etre of this kind of rhetoric and this kind of language is very much to lay the groundwork. The media, this is the right-wing media laying the groundwork for much more extreme policies. And so you can really see the two working in tandem together. This is where that bond between GB News and Reform, if it wasn't clear already, given that GB News literally has Nigel Farage and I think other Reform politicians or wannabe politicians with literally their own shows, it's that you can see them really working in tandem together and really working strategically together to engineer those types of outcomes that will harm all of us eventually, even if you're not a migrant, even if you're not black or brown, even if you're not queer. Like, eventually these policies, of course, will come for you. I suppose the last thing I'll say as well, which I think you picked up already on, Sarah, which is that this isn't about the victims. And there is something really disgusting about using victims of sexual violence, of abuse, people who are victims, to criminality. There's something really horrible and really low about using that to further a very warped political agenda. This kind of climate means that perhaps people who face sexual violence from those who are not talked about in this way. So perhaps white men, for example. We know that there was a horrible case in the news over the last few weeks about a Sikh woman who was raped by a white man who thought she was a Muslim. It might make it harder for those women who do face sexual violence from people who we're not being told actually really engage much in sexual violence at all. It might be harder for those victims to come forward because they may get the signal that actually you're just going to be ignored because that's not politically expendable to the media. That's not politically expendable to people in politics. So we're not really going to care if you're black and you were raped by a white man, for example. So that will really distort potentially the way that victims are able to feel like they come forward. Already, I think it's very, very difficult for a number of reasons for victims to come forward, to be honest, as it is. And this kind of creates more and more of a tension around that. So, this is a really, really scary road that our politics is going down on. GB News is perhaps somewhat of an extreme on this, but frankly, this is something which is becoming more and more mainstreamed in our conversations. Piers Morgan, a so-called centrist, I guess is what he calls himself. He had an at-length conversation with some very extreme people, I would say, on this particular debate about a link between ethnicity and sexual deviance or sexual violence. And it's an incredibly mainstreamed opinion, I think, more and more now, which is only going to wreak huge levels of damage to our sort of social fabric.
The president is literally a man who has done egregious things like sexually to women. I do just find it reeks of irony. This is someone that does not care at all about women and girls, but instead is just keen to assert that narrative that there's a problem with migration in this country and that it only seems to be migrant men, quote unquote, that commit these crimes. But actually, misogyny forms the fabrics of British society, so much so that people still don't feel comfortable to report because policing is highly misogynistic. And we have those in the force that recently, in the force, obviously you've got Sarah Everard, but people being involved in having their wives be drugged and then doing these barbaric things to them, who are everyday people that we see walking around the street. So it's concerning. The problem is that we have normalized this behavior as a society and that men are not holding other men accountable. We covered the CNN story really recently, and that story made me choke up so much because how is it that there were so many visits to that website and people weren't having the right conversations? There were actually only 200,000 people, however many people visited that part of the website where they were drugging their partners, but 6 million website visits to the website as a whole. It's like you're missing the point. The point is that there are people who are normalizing this behavior. That's the problem. Anyway, thank you, Banseka. So if you are enjoying the show, this is also a great opportunity for me to tell you what it is you need to do. I did not write this part in my script, so apologies in advance, but you guys know what it is you need to do. You can visit turnleftmedia.co.uk/support to support our work. We obviously want 2026 to be the year where we can get our own studio and for our contributors to be paid for the work that we do. As you guys know, we do this full time. Your support over the years has obviously been amazing and we're ready to take this to the next level. So we rely on small donations. If you want to be part of a media organisation that seeks to destroy the oligarchs, then head over to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support and there you can support us monthly on Patreon, or there is another link for a one-time contribution. And as you know, you can also become a YouTube member for just 99p. As you can see, my focus has been a little bit off today. Camera, not mentally, but my focus has been a little bit off. But yeah, it would be good to have you join the community. We also have a Discord that people always bang on about in the comments, which is so wonderful. Our wonderful community always talks about it. So do join that if you fancy having a chat with them afterwards. Right, on to our final story. 2 prominent US political commentators who were due to speak at events in the UK this week have said that they've been banned from entering the country. Cenk, Uygur, the host of Young Turk's online political talk show, and Hasan, Piker, who runs his own hours-long stream each day, said they had been stopped from appearing at SXSW London, while the former claimed also to have been prevented from speaking at an event run by University of Oxford students. The Times reported that Uygur's electronic travel authorization, otherwise known as the ETA, was cancelled last week after the Home Secretary concluded his presence in the UK would be divisive. On Twitter, Uygur said this: "I've been banned from the UK. I tried to get on a flight to London to attend SXSW London and give a speech at Oxford. I've been banned for criticising Israel. Are we free anymore? This is oppression of Western citizens by our own governments on behalf of a different country." Hasan Piker responded to this and stated, "The UK has revoked my visa as well, at the behest, of Israel. The West is betraying quote-unquote liberal values for a genocidal, fascist foreign government. Soon we will all become Israel." Last week, the Labour MP David Taylor called for Piker to be prevented from speaking, saying his presence in the UK was not conducive to the public good, and that it's good to see the Home Office take a tough stance against those who pose a serious risk to a public order, against those who pose a serious risk to public order and community cohesion. At a time when anti-Semitism is at record levels, it is completely inappropriate to give someone with a history of inflammatory rhetoric such a high platform. I hope the Home Secretary will now seriously consider using these powers against other speakers with a history of hateful speech who are set to appear at the festival. Now, do I agree with this? No, I don't. I'm very open to saying that. Criticising Israel and its genocidal regime is now worthy of banning. It feels incredibly authoritarian, and I'm not the only one who thinks so. Ash Sakar did this thread on Twitter, and she said, "I was supposed to chair the Hasan the Hun discussion at SXSW this week, who's been banned from entering the UK by Shavana Mahmood. First of all, at SXSW must facilitate a way for Hasan and Cenk to contribute remotely as a bare minimum refusal to comply with government censorship. Secondly, it's abundantly clear that the UK government has put Israel at the heart of its policy making around free expression, whether it's prescribing Palestine action as a terrorist group, arresting hundreds of people for holding signs supporting it, or banning Cenk, Uygur and Hasan Piker from UK for speech acts, which would not be unlawful in this country. What we're witnessing is an authoritarian turn motivated by Labour's fear of being called anti-Semitic and fear of being called out for their position on the genocidal war on Gaza. This Labour government don't give a shit about community cohesion. Every time they ban someone, whether they're from the left or from the right, from entering the UK, they're creating resentment, suspicion and blame. In light of all of this, the Jewish organisation, the Community Security Trust, urged SXSW organisers to act responsibly and not allow the UK to be a platform for Piker, whom they accuse of having a record of promoting rhetoric that includes anti-Semitic themes, denial of well-documented atrocities, and apparent support for extremist groups. The argument here is that it would increase anti-Semitism if Cenk and Hasan come into the country. Anti-Semitism will exist even if Cenk and Hasan are allowed in this country or not allowed in this country. If the argument is that anti-Semitism is a serious problem, then I agree. Anti-Semitism is a serious problem in the UK. It's vile and it's persistent, a persistent form of racism that's existed for centuries, and it should be confronted wherever it appears. Jewish communities deserve to live free from discrimination, intimidation, and hatred, just as every other community does. However, that is not actually the question being posed here. The question that I feel like is being posed here is whether the British public is apparently so incapable of hearing controversial political opinions that the government must step in and say, hey, I don't think that these people are permitted in this country. So I'm concerned. I think my biggest issue with this is that criticising the state of Israel does not make you anti-Semitic. I'm tired of this constantly being thrown out. You're anti-Semitic if you're criticising the state of Israel. No, I will consistently criticise the state of Israel because I do believe that there's a Zionist regime. They are currently conducting a genocidal war on Gaza. That is a fact. Whilst we're still having the same conversation about trying to educate people on the difference between Zionism and Judaism, I will never know. I don't know why we're still having this conversation. I do think it's insulting to the public who are apparently being treated as these passive vessels who are incapable of exercising judgment. I think it's insulting to Jewish people whose safety is being invoked in support of extraordinary restrictions on political speech without clear evidence that such measures will actually make them safer. And I think it's insulting just to democracy because it kind of replaces this idea of open debate with administrative power and authoritarianism, and assumes that difficult conversations are best resolved through exclusion. But Uh, I do want to bring Banseka in on this because they have banned far right agitators from coming into the country, but I do think that there is a massive difference between people who are literally plastering themselves with bacon to ward off Muslims and someone who's criticizing a state for the onslaught of violence they're doing to innocent people in Gaza and in Palestine and currently in Lebanon and also in various parts around Israel, because they are wanting to, their words not mine, wanting to establish the Greater Israeli Project. There is a difference here when you're hearing inflammatory remarks about migrants, particularly Muslims, refugees, and countless other groups, but then trying to flip the script and say that people who are criticizing the state of Israel are doing the same thing. I'm like, what line are you trying to draw here? So I don't really know. I will say, nothing, actually. I'm gonna say nothing. I want Banseka to come in. Banseka, because I could keep talking about this. What are your thoughts on all of this? Is it hypocritical to stop far right people coming into the country and be against the fact that Hasan and Cenk are being banned from coming into the UK?
So I actually think this is something that no matter what your political persuasion, people should be very worried about, actually. Freedom of expression is meant to be a human right that is enshrined under the Human Rights Act, Article 10, I think it is, on as part of the ECHR. There's a variety of statements that the media in its coverage could be talking about. One that Cenk and Hasan have made. One that gets brought up quite a lot from Hasan is a statement he made where it's framed that he supports Hamas. I think it's important to clarify with some of these statements, right? What he said was, in the broader context of what he was saying, he said that he would pick Hamas over Israel, which is used as a statement to suggest a ringing endorsement of Hamas. I don't think that it is. I think it's really just a recognition that ultimately Israel has wrought so much damage and destruction, infinitely far more damage to the Palestinian people and in general in that region, of course, than Hamas. They are the warmongers. They are the ones that continue to expand into the West Bank, which we know is a violation of international law. They are the ones who have flattened Gaza. And Netanyahu last week was talking about occupying 70% of Gaza. I'm sure eventually they'll be talking about 100%. We could list off, we could sit here and list off, so many different atrocities that have happened over the past 70 something years. I don't think in that context that is a inflammatory thing to say. Again, there are some people who might not like that. There might be some people who find that uncomfortable or difficult. Is that the same as threatening violence? Is that the same as saying that what happened on October 7th wasn't a war crime? I don't think so. I think it's a statement that makes it clear that the oppressors in that region of the world, generally speaking, are Israel and kind of always have been. If we look at this from a legal perspective, it's difficult to believe that a court of law in this country, if you were to take a statement like that, for example, it's difficult to believe that a court of law in this country could seriously uphold that as not passing the quite wide berth of free speech, that quite wide threshold, which I support and I agree with, by the way. I think certainly in the past, I've gone on a journey where, I've probably had stricter views on freedom of speech. I think I've seen the ways in which that's been violated and weaponized, particularly against the left. And so I think my views of freedom of speech have become much more expansive. And I do believe in everybody, left and right, center, whoever, having a wide berth of freedom of speech and us having a relatively high bar for that. So this kind of clampdown that's come from central government, Shabana Mahmood, and signed off by Keir Starmer, no doubt. This is, I would say, more extreme as a decision than what we have in our own laws at the moment. I don't think if that goes to the High Court or Supreme Court, for example, if it's challengeable, I don't see how that the statements like that are considered, well beyond the pale of somebody's ability to exercise free speech. If we were to compare those statements that Hassan has made, for example, to what some of these far right figures have been peddling, I would say it's a complete joke to pretend that, Hassan, Piker, or Cenk Uygur have said anything near the remit of partly what we heard at that march for the people who were allowed to be there, the Tommy Robinson march a few weekends ago. The anti-Muslim so-called influencer, Valentina Gomez, has said disgusting things about Muslims. She's talked about burning the Quran. I don't think Cenk, Uygur or Hasan have talked about burning the Torah. If they did, that would be disgusting. Valentina Gomez has referred to Muslims as dirty. That's disgusting. And far more. She's talked about, violence against migrants. She's talked about the idea of getting a gun and just shooting migrants at the border. That's very, very violent. I think that goes well beyond the pale of what was said here. So I think some of the comparisons that are being made here are quite unfair, really. And I do not think that just because you might find some of the things that Hasan or Cenk have said is uncomfortable or is not frictionless, that is justification to say that they should be barred from coming here to talk about this very, very important, very, very big issue. So Starmer and Mahmoud are really usurping, I think, our own laws in many ways and our own legal limits to make these highly ideological, somewhat arbitrary, one might say, decisions, or perhaps they're incredibly conscious. Arbitrary is probably not quite the right word. And it's really important because this situation is now getting so messed up and mixed up that I actually think a lot of people are losing their ability to be able to find their way in this. This constant conflation between pro-Palestinian sentiment and anti-Semitism is extremely tenuous. Nobody can explain to me or anybody else what the true link is between, for example, going on a pro-Palestine march where the vast majority of people are not saying anti-Semitic things, they're not calling for the deaths of Jews, statements like from the river to the sea, which I think is perfectly compatible with a one-state solution. Again, that might make some people feel uncomfortable. They might not like that, because I want Israel to exist, and they're allowed to think that. But just because it makes them feel uncomfortable, that's not the same as anti-Semitism. There are a small number of people, of course, who support Palestine because of anti-Semitism. We can never say that number's zero. I get that. But the vast, vast majority of people who support Palestinians just want Palestinians to have the rights and protections that everybody deserves, and they haven't had for the past 70-something years. And the last thing I'll say on this really quickly, I think it's really important to outline this. It's worth reading Rachel Shabi, if people are familiar with her. She's a Mizrahi Jewish journalist whose family were from Iraq, but she lives here in Britain, and she writes really, really with a lot of clarity about these issues. The last thing I'll say on this is, as well as this being a threat to free speech and deeply damaging to the Palestinian fight for justice, which is very, very important, these decisions, I think, done very explicitly in the name of protecting Jewish people from anti-Semitism, actually do the opposite. And I have no doubt that the rise in anti-Semitism that we're seeing, that is real. There is a real rise in anti-Semitism, absolutely. I think some of that absolutely comes from what we've seen in line with Israel's horrific actions in the US, and is a direct consequence, frankly, of not only talking about Israel and Jewish people interchangeably, which the UK state does and which Israel does all the time. That's very dangerous, but also this very heavy-handed approach that our state now has, with little to no explanation as to why there's this big crackdown on people who express pro-Palestinian sentiment. And these things really cause people to do one or both of two things. This kind of approach means that increasingly people no longer care about anti-Semitism. And I'll be honest, I have heard some people have said to me, look, I don't really care about the Holocaust now, which is awful. It's a terrible state of affairs to reach that point. Because we want people to care about the Holocaust. We want people to care about anti-Semitism, past and present. And the other thing which I think happens as well, and I think that's evident with some of the conversations that have been going on recently, for example, with conversations around false flags and people definitively talking about that attack on Jewish ambulances as definitively a false flag, is that this way of operating that the British state is doing is fueling anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about Jewish people, because it is now very easy for someone to take a logical leap to now say, well, this is just more evidence of Jews controlling our country. This is what they're laying the groundwork for. And whilst rhetorically the Labour Party are talking a big game, reform the same thing, all of these parties are talking a big game about how they really care about Jewish people. Kemi Badner, I really care about anti-Semitism. No, you are laying the groundwork for anti-Semitism and for more violence to keep happening. And in many ways, it is in Israel's interest for anti-Semitism to keep happening, because that way they keep justifying their raison d'etre. It's this horrible cyclical thing where they say we need a state because Jewish people need to be protected. They do horrible things as a state in the name of Jewish people. Anti-Semitic attacks rise, And then they get to say, see, this is why we need a Jewish state for Jewish people only. And this is how we get to justify our apartheid state. And it is a horrible, horrible cyclical thing that we on the left, I think, have to be really mindful about and really cognizant on, in terms of trying to break some of that cycle and to not fall into these conspiratorial theories that do the work of maintaining and keeping states like Israel and the terrible things that they do.
That was so bloody brilliant. You're so right. They pave the path for even more anti-Semitism. That's exactly what they're doing. And I think that what they're doing as well is they're underpinning, or they're going to make it even more difficult for people to actually discern the difference between Zionism and Judaism. Hence why these anti-Semitic attacks will just continue happening. And like you said, people are now denouncing the number of people who have died in the Holocaust, saying they don't care about the Holocaust. Like all of these, like these horrible conspiracies are starting to erupt because of things like this. Because people are saying, well, no, you can't speak on it. Don't speak on it, otherwise you're anti-Semitic. And people are just like, fuck it. Like I just want to, like, they're angry at what's happening to Palestinians. They're angry at what's happening in Palestine. But when you are banning Hasan, Piker and Cenk, you're not solving the issue, you're only amplifying it even further. And I do think there is a meaningful distinction between criticism of a state, criticism of a government, or criticism of an ideology, and the systematic targeting of a minority population. There is a meaningful distinction between political commentary and the deliberate cultivation of hostility towards a vulnerable community. Hence why I think it's also important to tell the difference between those far right agitators who are quite fascistic, like they're quite, like I think they're fascist in some way, because they are rooting for an ethno-nationalist state in many things that they're saying. But that just massively different when you've got people, like I said earlier, who are dressed in burqas pretending to be Muslim and then like prancing around in religious attire, and then putting bacon on their shoulders to ward off Muslims and speak in the most expletive and egregious manner about Muslims and their existence in Britain, and compare that to the criticism of the genocidal war on Gaza and what Israel are doing at the moment, then I'm sorry, I will say I will support the exclusion of far-right figures, because those figures were engaged in the active promotion of anti-Muslim hatred and anti-migrant scapegoating and this racialized political mobilization. And I will continue saying that what Israel is doing, that they are, the state in and of itself are causing terror. They are terrorists who are enacting a genocidal war on Gaza, and I will say that till the day that I die, until it stops. But you make a really great point, Banseka. I think it'd be a great time to go to our comments and see what everyone else has said. Unless you got anything else you want to say?
No. Let's get some comments in. Let's hear what people said.
Hello,
Curtis Daly.
what a fantastic show. It's always superb, but obviously both of you on, especially together, I really enjoy.
I just love being Banseka. I'm biased.
I mean, we got a bit of feedback from someone, I think, by the way. Maybe take someone's phone away from your laptop. I don't know. It's not too bad. Anyway, I think I assume the thrust of the conversation, the comments, is going to be around Hasan, Piker and Cenk Uygur. But I will start from our super chats as usual. Coops 4476. If we could bring that comment up. There we go. I just became a member, so thank you so much for being part of the team. Michael, to see you in every show.
Hi, Michael.
Give the Turn Left membership. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Layla, of course, we were having some autofocus trouble. Gave a £2 super chat.
I think my shit's just dirty. Sorry.
But this is what happens when you run things on a voluntary system.
On a budget.
We haven't currently got high-tech cameras and a beautiful studio, but that is going to happen. Of course, Banseka has been in the studio, and Sarah has been in the studio.
Yes.
And that's going to happen again, of course. But imagine that was every single show, which one day it will be. So please bear with when it comes to tech issues and stuff.
Yes,
Benji here Is gifted Turn Left
Thanks,
membership.
Benji.
And Ollie, again, has gifted
Thanks,
Turn Left
Ollie.
membership. Layla just came back with another £2 super chat and said, now you've read out my super chat. Mwahaha. Well, that's the thing.
Thanks,
Even if
Layla.
when we fix the autofigures, because you paid money, we're going to read out anyway. So yeah. Let's go to our comments. I'm going to start in order. Becca says Rob Kenyon is a Riz Hoover. He's a charmless man. He doesn't bother to read. Apparently, that appeals to a lot of people. He doesn't have the Riz, does he?
Is he a plumber? I'm
He
not
is a
saying that's why
plumber.
he doesn't bother to read, but I think he's kind of wanting to follow Hannah Spencer slightly. That Hannah Spencer had this appeal because she was very, very normal in the political sphere. I think he's trying to do the same thing, because when I was stalking his Twitter to my disfortune, disfortune, or you wouldn't think I was an English teacher, but yeah, anyway, to my displeasure, when I was stalking his Twitter, he was doing it outside of his like white van, and it's like he was trying to be really, really relatable to the people. So I don't know if he's trying to follow in Hannah Spencer's footsteps. Misfortune, guys. Arabic, I learnt that alphabet before my English one, just saying, so it's my excuse.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of copying the Hannah Spencer thing.
I
It's
would
like, oh,
say,
they've got a
though,
plumber, we'll have a plumber.
yeah, he's self-employed though. I think I said that at the start of the show. I was like, like, again, I'm like, it's not quite the same, 'cause it's like you're a self-employed plumber, so you're like, you work freelance and you probably earn, I'm gonna say decent money, because like I think most plumbers earn good money, because there's loads of work, right? Like my dad the other day was like, you should have been a plumber. So I have a better salary. So it's interesting. He's got these kind of cultural hallmarks of being working class, and they've obviously played up to that. You know, the idea that he's stood outside his van and, you know, with his arms crossed, and, you know, looks really kind of cosplay working class. But the reality is he's probably doing a lot better, I imagine, than a lot of people in that constituency even now, prior to potentially becoming an MP. So yeah, it's they've made a meal out of him being a plumber. It's like, bro, you are self-employed and possibly earning six figures.
I'm sorry to say, Banseka, but I think it might be your audio. I don't know if maybe a battery is running out or something, but it jitters when you speak.
Oh, okay.
There is interference going on. Maybe it's your headphones with the mic.
Is that any better?
But it was all fine until... Sorry, speak again.
Is it working? That might be better.
No, I could slightly hear it still. I think it happened when I came in, so it's somehow my fault anyway. But yeah, I don't know if it's to do with like your microphone is running low battery. I don't know, or if there's something interfering with it. What was I going to say? Yeah, the plumbing thing. I just find it so funny that we had a lot of right wingers and reform people attack Hannah Spencer for being a plumber. And there was lots of classist things coming from the right wing, despite the fact that they always lecture the left on supporting working class people.
Yeah.
And then we've got Rob Kenyon, who's a plumber, but I think he's a small business owner. And obviously that's not a bad thing, but obviously technically you're not a worker. If we're going to use Marxist terms, he's petite bourgeoisie.
Yeah. And it is ironic because they're always complaining, the right are always complaining about the establishment being a bunch of like privately educated twats. And I think we kind of say the same thing sometimes. But when you actually get real representation who aren't part of the political, you know, the quote unquote, the status quo really of what's expected to be a politician, like this privately educated person. It's when it's on their side it doesn't matter, but when it's on this side, you know, we're pompous freaks. So
what do you make of this comment? Actual Intrepid says, if he didn't have, this is Andy Burnham, if he didn't have an accent, Andy Burnham, I doubt would be as popular. In a way, I feel like that's part of his charm. He's a northerner, you know. People are sick of southern MPs who have been parachuted into northern seats, for example. I do think that his accent is kind of part of what makes him likable to the general populace. Or is that being overblown? Maybe if he had a southern accent, would they still like him?
good question.
I think that's probably part of it. I think that's part of what makes him seem perhaps more down to earth, and it's part of what makes the idea that he's not of Westminster more convincing. Obviously, we know he did ultimately spend the majority of his political career in Westminster.
Yeah.
He comes, I think, pretty much fresh out of uni, straight into politics. I don't think he's ever really done anything else. So I think the accent is part of it. As I said before, I do think he's got clearly some kind of ability to read the mood a bit. And to make some of the right noises or say things in a bit of a different way. You know, he's not in kind of Tony Blair mode. Tony Blair is completely in denial, by the way. Like, he sounds like he's in a psychosis.
I actually don't think it's okay.
I think it was Alyssa. She said that, what is it with Tony Blair's face? Whenever I see him on TV, he literally looks like the devil. And I'm like, yeah. Like, he's really morphed into who he is internally. Because I think, like, in his ascendancy and when he was Prime Minister, a lot of people, and maybe it's a 90s look, but a lot of people are like, oh, he's very charming, and some people dared to say he was attractive. Again, that might be a 90s thing. I don't know. Different standards of attraction, I suppose. We have different standards over the years. But he really... I mean, do you remember that image during COVID where everyone had like long hair and didn't cut their hair?
Oh my god!
And it's Tony Blair with his little alfalfa behind him, little mullet. It was disgusting.
He was so not the disgusting.
Wow, I'm sorry. I think we're allowed to call Tony Blair disgusting.
No, I agree. No, it's the way you said it. It's the way you said it that made me laugh. Listen, I'm not some fucking Tony
we've
Blair
got
fan.
Blairite defender, have we?
No, God forbid am I ever a Blairite. God forbid.
There you have it, a Blairite who hates landlords.
Oh yeah, can you imagine? Bloody hell. No, but I don't know why he thinks he's still so relevant. Like, why is he still giving his 2 pence every now and then? Like, it's always like, Tony Blair has said, and I'm like, who cares? No one was asking you, Tony.
It's always framed as a rare intervention. And I'm like, this guy's talking all the time. I feel like we hear from him every other week.
No more.
I just love that. It's a rare intervention and it's anything. But the thing is, though, Sarah, you asked the question, but why is he always invoked and no one cares? Because, like, the political establishment and the media especially are still full of Blairites. Like, there is... Yeah. Like, for the general populace, we're so over Blairism. We don't like it, okay? The left, the right, hate Blair, hate New Labour. But I think a lot of the lobby journalists, legacy media journalists, commentators love Blairism because they think that was... It's almost like is it the Francis Fukuyama thing where he's like the end of history. And I feel like for a lot of those in the political establishment, they believe that Blairism is the end of history. That was actually like the pinnacle of Britishness or British politics because we stopped being ideological. We apparently settled the debate on capitalism and socialism. And, you know, it was, in their view, slick political operations. So I think for the political establishment, especially the BBC, I think they're all Blairites. They look at Blair and still think it was the pinnacle of British politics. So they love bringing them back. And it's maybe a nostalgia thing too.
Yeah, definitely.
100% it is. Because you also still do get the odd person that will say, well, Blair was all right. I mean, apart from the Iraq War, he was all right. And I'm thinking, what do you mean just apart from the Iraq War, as though it's some sort of footnote that was so just meaningless? Like, it was atrocious. That man was evil. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. Weird guy.
Exactly. It wasn't just the Iraq War. You had PFI, for example. You had the assault on welfare. Yeah. And the massively authoritarianism within public services, especially policing. There's a lot of racist policies that came out of Blairism. We had another super chat, by the way. Well, a couple actually. Coops.
I want that video of Ed Balls again.
The video of Ed Balls.
When Zach Polanski's
yes. That was so random that you brought that up. But we love it.
I love it. I need to play it again.
I think you just said about Ed Balls' his wife is Yvette Cooper. She's like one of the top. She has one of the top jobs, right? And it's not unbiased. And then he was like, "This is why people hate the media," which I loved. Yeah. But Coops, come on, a big donation, 19.99, a few pennies for the Studio Park. Great show, as always, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank
and
you
yes,
so
all your help means a lot.
Soon. Inshallah, soon.
Well, soon we'll have you both in the studio. It's semi-studio because it's technically in my house, but at least it's slightly separated.
No, we
People
definitely
know
will be
that, so
back.
we can admit that. But it's good fun having people in the studio. Layla back again with another £5 super chat. Says both the hosts have beautiful smiles. We need to give them more reason to. More room to type. Don't know what to say. Have a lovely day, everyone in the chat. That was so lovely.
That's literally
Lovely.
so wonderful. Thank you.
And not really Rachel Atwood with a $2 super chat. Says I still think Blair is playing a role. It's staged.
Yes.
I wonder. I
I mean, I
I
actually
guess,
don't
yeah.
know. Yeah.
He
Wouldn't deny that.
certainly plays a role in facilitating the political establishment. Okay, let's carry on. This is right. I think this is a good one because it's a controversial one. So Michael says, I actually will be controversial. I don't mind if Reform win this by-election. The more Reform MPs showing constituencies or constituents how bad they are, they're less likely to gain a majority at a general election. So, I want to get your thoughts on this.
I mean, so I was okay with this take with local elections, like the just for councillors and stuff and whatever. But I don't know. I don't know if I want Reform having another seat. I just don't. I can see what Michael's saying. I really can. I just don't know if I think that it would even, if that would be the change that that would change people's hearts or minds per se. I don't think that that's going to be the be or end all. I think that even if Reform perform relatively shit in some constituencies, you'll still get people who say, but we've had Labour and Tories for so long, let's just go for this party because we need a change. Like, people are sick of the two-party system, and I think they are kind of wanting a change, but I also don't think Reform are that popular that it's going to cause a bit of a dent either way. But maybe that's me being too optimistic. I think Banseka's take will be a bit more interesting.
No, not necessarily. It's a bit of a conflicting one. Two things, I suppose. Someone's already put this in the chat, that the people of Kent seem not to realise how incompetent Reform are yet. I live in Kent. There's some sensible people
Oh,
here.
I'm so sorry.
So the Kent example, though, is a really good one because, of course, they control a council down here. And just from speaking to people locally, and Dartford is where I live, so it borders London. I'm sort of semi-a-Londoner, really. There's not a lot at the moment coming through locally, I don't think, in terms of people being like, wow, Reform is so shit. So I don't think it's translating yet, and I think it will actually take quite a long period of time before there's that recognition. I mean, how many chances do people give the Tories? A lot of chances. And again, I don't think we should underestimate Reform and assume that they'll just be so wildly incompetent. I don't want to have that level of hubris actually about them. And I certainly don't have that level of hubris about Nigel Farage either, who I think is a political opponent who's actually been underestimated by certainly Liberals, but I think also, to be fair, elements of the left. The other thing that happens as well is obviously if this Reform guy wins the election, that means Andy Burnham's not in Parliament. And that means that the Labour Party is considerably weaker. Again, I've been quite critical tonight of Andy Burnham. I don't think he's got a rigorous project behind him, and I think he will fold in lots of areas. But I think if Keir Starmer just sort of stays on, because I really don't know who else would take over from him. Ed Miliband? Like, probably not. So the Labour Party continue to be in an exceptionally weak position, where the right continue to have more and more of a stronghold. Andy Burnham would still find it really, really difficult to implement much change, and I think he would face a lot of internal opposition, and it's quite clear that there's a cap on his appetite for change. But I think with Andy Burnham, there is maybe a bit more of a chance they might be a bit more amenable to pressure from the left. Maybe Andy Burnham would have some agility to be able to move in ways in which Keir Starmer just is so incompetent, he can't. He's not got the talents, he's not got the skills. Keir Starmer is a manager who fundamentally just kind of wanted to just drop down orders from above, from Morgan McSweeney. He wasn't someone with his own political ideology. Neither is Andy Burnham. So I would worry about if Keir Starmer remains in power, what that says. To me, that's like, well, we're definitely having a Reform government, possibly with a majority. that starts to come in question maybe a little bit more with Andy Burnham on the scene. Again, Andy Burnham's not a silver bullet. I do not, in many ways, I don't care about the Labour Party, like, on a personal level, really, anymore. But I am worried that with Keir Starmer at the helm till the party just kind of completely falls off the wagon, that makes a reform overall victory much likely. Wouldn't bank on the whole. People will recognise they're incompetent. Will realise they're incompetent when it's probably too late and a lot of damage has been done.
Yeah, I don't think that people really care about, not that they don't care, people care. But for example, Farage, there is still some appeal to Farage from certain reform supporters, despite the fact that it's very well known that Farage is barely in Clacton. And then you'll have people who say, but it doesn't matter because he's reform leader. Like, he's the reform leader. And it's like, no, but his constituency is Clacton. His responsibility is to Clacton. And yes, he's reform leader, but what is he doing for the people of Clacton? He's not doing a lot. So I don't think that's what's going to sway people's votes.
I think that tracks with my view. I mean, when you speak to people, any criticism, if you say, well, Nigel Farage takes loads of money from this person, that person, I get a knee-jerk response, which is, well, the other guys do it. So I think it's harder to convince people to say, well, actually, we want reform to be momentarily successful and they can prove to the people how bad they are. Unfortunately, I don't think that's the way people typically operate in politics. I think often you will say how badly the councils are ran, and their response is, well, all of politics is bad. I'm just sick of all of them. At least reform's different. You also have the fact that whilst reform councils are incredibly incompetent, and there are some conservative councils in which they make political decisions that we hate, but they are competent because they know how it all works. The main fault is from central government because they don't fund local councils. So for a lot of people, they won't feel the difference anyway. Exactly. A lot of people are not going to feel the difference between a Conservative council or a Reform council, or maybe even a Labour council, because ultimately local councils are so underfunded that any meaningful change doesn't really change if you have a Reform councillor or a Conservative councillor. Now, that's not the case for everywhere. There are certain councils where they'll do a phenomenal job and bring things into municipal ownership and stuff like that. There are absolute examples, right? So people got the Preston model, for example. But by and large, unless you're really politically tuned in, most people, I don't think, would look at it that way. That's not to say there probably aren't other reasons why people might be like, do you know what, Andy Burnham, winning the by-election might not be good for politics generally. Some people say it will be good for politics because Labour might move in a better direction. Other people argue that may be the case, but it could really dent the Green Party support. And ultimately, Labour are an anti-democratic party. The Greens are a democratic party. It serves politics well if the party that has actual democracy inside it becomes more successful. I think that's my worry. Like, ultimately, yes, Andy Burnham will probably be better than Keir Starmer and probably has a better shot of beating reform. But my long-term worry is that it's been like Labour for years, especially under the Corbyn project, fought so hard to have a democratic party and failed, that the Greens are a genuine democratic party, and that needs to be protected. Ultimately, you can't democratise Britain without... We used to say you can't democratise Britain without democratising the Labour Party. Now we just need a democratic party, so that's something the Greens have, but that should be protected. But there's so many things, so many threads to this, which is confusing. But I thought that was a great comment to highlight. But then Mike also said, "I love Sarah and Banseka show." Don't we all?
Thank you. So do I.
Becca, so this is now Ben Lee and GB News. So Becca says, "Sorry, I don't think he was wrong to be aggressive. It was deserved, but I'm a pacifist, so I'd be deeply uncomfortable there. Ben Leo is looking for a scrap so he can play the victim." What are your thoughts? Do you think the gentleman was right in his behaviour? I've got my personal view. I want to hear both of yours first.
I think, like, when historically black people in particularly have been made to be the villain. They have always been posited through colonial history as these barbaric, savage individuals. And I think what Ben Leo's doing is he's trying to still continue that colonial lie that people who come from foreign countries, aka the black and the brown man, are these barbaric, savage individuals that need to be tamed. And if you saw the comments, is that what it's called on Twitter? The comments underneath his tweet, they were these AI generated images of monkeys,
of course,
that were in shackles, and a what do they call it, like a dog lead, as though to say that we, the white men, have to contain these black individuals. I think his reaction is appropriate, because who are you, Mr. Ben Leo, coming here trying to spread this propaganda, this lie? The people who are committing the most sexual offences in Britain are black and brown men, are men coming in on these small boats, are men coming into the country, quote unquote, illegally. When actually the problem, Ben, are people like you who pretend to fly a flag for women and girls, call us your girls, possess us in the way that you deem appropriate, and pretend to care. Piss off with your fake performative gesture of I care about the women and girls in this country. You don't give a shit. You just want to stand outside an ICE detention centre, instigate something with someone who obviously will inevitably disagree with you, because there are people literally protesting outside about the treatment of people in those detention centres. You wanted to pick a fight so that you could use it as a clickbait material for your show. Get a job.
Banseka?
Yeah, it's like, I'm not really massively bothered about him intimidating him a little bit. I'll never say on the record oh yeah, violence is cool or whatever, but I totally understand where that anger is obviously coming from. Maybe I've spent too much time just being in the face of people who do literally say stuff like that, to your face, and you feel like you have to find a way to navigate that or deal with that. But ultimately he had no answers to the questions, right? As much as there was broad in that, there was also he asked really good questions. He was like, well, what about colonialism? What about British Empire? What about the subjugation of black and brown people as part of the Empire project? And he kind of had to just admit, oh yeah, that happened.
Yeah, Ben did admit, didn't he? He was
a lot of the time they try and pretend it doesn't, or oh no, it was all 80% good, or
the UK ended
20% bad, and he actually got it out of him. He got it out of him that that shit happened actually. So that was really good. It was it was kind of a funny balance of physical flexing, but also he actually had really good questions, and he got him.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously when you turn around and say I'm going to break your jaw and stuff, I don't think that's good. But I think there are ways to channel energy, and sometimes it doesn't always have to end. And you saying you're going to punch some chinless dweeb like Ben Leo. Having said that, though,
Chinless.
having said that, I think if you've had hundreds of years of systemic racism, you've had slavery, and you've had today the gaslighting of that, the fact that we still have so many racist practices that is a hangover from slavery, and we still have black bodies on the street of the US being gunned down by the police. You have it even in this country, the racist policing. Then when someone who's obviously antagonizing you, because GB News are not there to be an unbiased arbiter, they are there to antagonize. In fact, that reaction was perfect for them, which is why I was a bit damn, I wish he hadn't have reacted in that way, because it was exactly what GB News wanted. They wanted that clip to be it's these leftists, they're violent and stuff. But it's an example was kind of the way the response to reactions gaslighting is if someone is being domestically abused or even emotionally manipulated in a domestic relationship, and let's say the man has emotionally manipulated his wife for years and years and years, but he never raised his voice, but he just manipulated her, and then she turned around and had a massive meltdown screaming whatever, and they filmed it, which that's actually happened, and like she's crazy, she's delirious. Look what I've got to put up with. But it's like, but what about the years of quiet, subtle manipulation? And I think that's kind of what's happening at play here. Again, I'm not sure. Like, it looks very good that he wants to knock out Ben Leo, but at the same time, it's like you know exactly what you are doing. You are antagonizing people, and then on top of that, GB News and Belio is pushing completely false statistics. Or like his tweet was a gaslighting again, because it's like me. Oh, I was just politely pointing out statistics. Them, I'm gonna kill you, and this is why Charlie Kirk was murdered. But it's like, once again, it's the passive aggressive manipulation, pretending that you're reasonable, versus the very true but yes raw anger. But it's like, you weren't just simply pointing out statistics. Ben Leo and GB News have often shared the Center for Migration Control, which is a completely bogus think tank in which they've weaponized data and outright fabricated data to push this idea that Afghans are committing crimes at a higher rate. Again, as you pointed out, Sarah, Lewis has done extensive work on this, looked into it. The person who runs Center for Migration Control is a Reform member. And like, the right-wing media have gaslit everyone for decades and decades and decades. So it's not you just politely pointing out statistics. No, you are part of a machine that has gaslit people for decades, and then you're angry at the response in which you have fostered completely deliberately, and you've manufactured it, and then you've got the response you wanted by going, oh my god, these deranged leftists. And then a lot of people said in the chat, like, pretty sure all the pacifists are leftists. You know, but like, think about how the Raise the Colours guy, he's now in prison for killing a pub owner, I think, for punched him to death. There's no reports about right-wing violence. What about the riots on the streets? So at the end of the day, sure, okay, this guy was like, I'm going to knock out Ben Leo. Probably it was just words anyway. Probably wasn't actually going to do it. But the contrast here is there were people burning down hotels. There were children in these hotels, and people were rioting on the streets, hunting black people. So like, spare me this whole like, oh my god, the left wing are violent bullshit.
Facts. I agree with that.
So and Edward Sexby says, yeah, totally get this guy's anger. Autumn Leaves said, get Hasan on, turn left. Yeah, well, we've just been really busy. I guess we haven't invited him.
I got his number. No, I'm joking.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this was the top story, but I actually don't really know what to add to this, because we all know how utterly ridiculous these two bannings are, and there are some disagreements I have with Cenk, Uygur and Star, but like, it's obviously ridiculous it got banned. I did actually want to quickly say though, but where, Sarah, you're absolutely right, where a lot of people might be like, oh, well, look at the left kicking off that Hasan Piker and Cenk Uygur are banned, but what about Valentina Gomez and all these other right-wing people? But Sarah, you're right. It's kind of centrist big brain to look at these scenarios and think it's the same thing. Cenk and Hasan Piker are criticizing an ideology and a state. A state is not a protected characteristic, and this aforementioned state is currently committing a genocide. Someone like Valentina Gomez is attacking individual people. She called Shabana Mahmood a dirty Pakistani. She called the Home Secretary that. And you think you're going to be okay? Like, don't tell me that these things are equal. One is doing it because you're a disgusting racist and you're just full of hatred. And the other is calling out war crimes. So I really hate this false parallel that the left and right are exactly the same, which centrists often do. Oh, it's the horseshoe theory. There's no such thing as the horseshoe theory. Doesn't exist. Okay?
There's something to say as well about reaction from like civil society on this, like, so the reaction of like the sort of journalist class in general, which has been very unsympathetic, I think, to issues around free speech. I was listening to like LBC like earlier today, and you know, there wasn't really a lot of frustration or anger from a lot of these so-called journalists and presenters who should really care about free speech. The other thing as well is that the venue that was supposed to be hosting, I think it was Hasan Piker. I think he was going to be interviewed by Ash Sarkar, actually, from our media. And they have not really released, I think, a statement that in any way seriously pushes back on on the decision. So as a platform that is meant to be like, yeah, we're holding in-person events and long-form conversation. Yeah. You can't even uphold basic tenets of like freedom of speech and show any
Yeah.
opposition to this. They didn't even try and I think and do and try and set up a remote interview where they could have at least interviewed Hasan remotely as a show of solidarity with the concept of freedom of speech, which I presume should be a value of theirs. And so there is something here about the response to wider sort of civil society, journalists, those who are platforming some of these ideas to actually engage in the fight back and not just be silent, but to actually try and show some level of resistance as well
Yeah.
to
What was
this
the
this
event
lawmaking
called?
that's going to impact a lot of us.
Such a good
What was
point.
the event called? SX.
SXSW. But you're so
Because
right,
they
because
didn't show solidarity, and Ash Sarkar said "fuck you." Then she pulled
yeah,
out.
they didn't, because but doesn't that like, sorry, I don't know why I'm making such a hullabaloo with this ruckus, but essentially, does that not show that there is this fear, this real fear, this visceral fear of criticizing the state of Israel? People are so scared to do it because they think they're going to be called anti-Semitic for it. You can absolutely criticize the state of Israel. You're not going to be anti-Semitic for it. If you say something egregious towards Jewish peoples, then absolutely you'll probably be called anti-Semitic, and that is probably anti-Semitism. 100% it is. But if I'm criticizing the onslaught of violence that's happening to innocent people in neighbouring countries of Israel, you're not anti-Semitic at all. But if you are also not showing solidarity of Hasan Piker and Cenk Uygur, and saying, yeah, okay, let's do it remotely because what they're doing is criticising a genocidal regime, then you're actually normalising the idea that criticising Israel is anti-Semitic, but it's
You're
not.
legitimising that, aren't you?
Yeah, you're legitimising it.
Yeah.
You're going to make it worse for Jewish people.
I'm very happy because I didn't know the response from the event organisers, but apparently they were weak. So I'm glad Ash Sarkar said, "Well, I'm not going to participate in it because you got two big speakers, or at least one big speaker, and you haven't even defended them." Vicky Clear with £5 super chat. I thought Valentina Gomez still got hit on the boats, as it's so easy to do that. Yeah, she was like, "I'm going to come on a boat," and I was like, "These people do not understand their they have an incoherent ideology that they're like, oh, we stop the boats, but also Valentina Gomez, I should be on a boat." Crazy stuff. Let's just round it off. Hype them.
Oh,
Banseka, fire.
she's fire. She
and
is.
Edward Sexby said, "Thank you, Banseka. This is so
Yeah,
spot on." I think it was
she's
a
always
little
spot
rant you did at the end of the third story.
She's always
But
spot
to
on.
be honest, I'm like fire whenever you speak, regardless of the story.
Yeah, it's true. Everything that comes out of Banseka's mouth is just absolute gold. I'm like, oh my god, Banseka, you're a dream. She's so
Right.
amazing.
Thank you so much.
you,
Brilliant
guys.
comment section. I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thank you, Curtis. Late daily. Joking. Someone said that in the comments. It's so jokes. Thank you so much, Banseka. You've been an absolute dream on a Monday. I think it's always so great to have us together. And me and Banseka met really recently. It was really wonderful as well. I mean, we've met before, but it was nice to have a nice little catch up recently too. So hopefully more to come, more shows together, more in-studio appearances together. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, another
Yeah.
great show, guys. Sorry about my tech issues with my microphone. I do not know what happened.
So
but,
it's turn
yeah.
left. It's such a normal thing. No one's going to judge you. No one's going to judge you here for it. Thanks so much, Banseka. And thanks to all of you guys. Oh God, what a Monday, eh? Monday. I'm back at work. But as ever, do remember to check out turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. There you can support us monthly on Patreon, or there's another link for a one-time contribution, and you also know that you can become a YouTube member for just 99p. We go live every Monday, Wednesday and Friday, and I'll see you guys next time.